What if the United States of America never existed? No Statue of Liberty, no Hollywood, no Silicon Valley, a world with no American power, no dollar dominance, and no superpower at all. The truth is that our world would look completely unrecognizable today in the absence of the United States. Let's go back to the year 1776. Imagine if George Washington's bold attack across the frozen Delaware River had failed. The American Revolution would have collapsed because Britain would have crushed the rebellion. There would have been no United States. The colonies would have stayed under British control, and the dream of independence would have ended before it even began. Without the United States, the British Empire would have become unstoppable. It already controlled Canada, India, and vast parts of Africa. If the 13 colonies had stayed loyal, Britain's empire would have stretched from the Arctic to the Caribbean. London, not Washington, would have become the permanent center of global power. But this would have come with massive consequences. Slavery would have ended much earlier because Britain abolished it across its empire in 1833. There would have been no American Civil War, no Abraham Lincoln, and no Emancipation Proclamation. The Mexican War would never have happened. Texas and California would likely have remained Mexican, and the Wild West might never have existed at all. Here's the twist. Without an American Revolution, there would have been no French Revolution either. France had gone bankrupt helping the American rebels, and that debt pushed the French people into revolt, which eventually brought Napoleon to power. Without the US rebellion, there would have been no French Revolution, no Napoleon, and no wars that reshaped Europe. So who would have ruled North America? Most likely Britain. The United States would have been more like a larger version of Canada, loyal to the crown, polite, and far less powerful. By the 1900s, the British flag could have stretched from Florida to Alaska. Meanwhile, Russia would have kept Alaska, since there would have been no US government to buy it. That means the Cold War might one day have happened between Britain and Russia, not America and Russia. And speaking of wars, World War I would have been completely different. Without the United States joining in 1917, Germany might actually have won. That would have meant no Treaty of Versailles, no Hitler, and no World War II. But let's say World War II still happened. Without America's industrial power and military support, the Allies might have lost. Europe could have remained under Nazi control, and Japan might have dominated the Pacific. Without the US, there would have been no NATO, no Marshall Plan, and no Western alliance to balance the Soviet Union. That would have meant one thing. By the 1950s, communism could have spread across all of Europe, much of Asia, and maybe even Africa. Moscow, not Washington, would have become the center of world power, and the global language of business might have been Russian, not English. If we talk about Latin and South America, without the United States, these countries would have followed a completely different path. European empires would have continued to control or heavily influence the region throughout the 19th and 20th centuries. Countries like Mexico, Brazil, and Argentina might never have fully broken free from foreign dominance, as Britain, France, and Spain would have competed for their resources and trade routes. The Panama Canal wouldn't have existed either. It was an American project that connected the Atlantic and Pacific and reshaped global trade. Without it, South America would have remained more isolated, and global shipping would have depended on the long, dangerous route around the Drake Passage. Even the rise of oil-rich Venezuela or industrial Brazil would have been much slower. Politically, there would have been no CIA interventions, no Cold War influence, and no waves of American culture spreading to the south. Economically, the world would have been far poorer. Without America's post-war boom, there would have been no global dollar, no IMF, and no World Bank to help rebuild shattered economies. The internet wouldn't have existed in the form we know today. Silicon Valley, Microsoft, Apple, and Google wouldn't even exist. China's economy would never have found a market to sell its cheap goods to, and the Middle East would have lacked the biggest buyer of its oil in history. The global trade would have collapsed. Without the United States acting as the consumer of the world, China's factories, Germany's exports, and Japan's technology industries would have all shrunk. And when it comes to culture, there would have been no Hollywood, no Marvel, no Coca-Cola, and no McDonald's. Pop music might have been born in London or Paris, but without America's cultural engine, it would never have become global. The concept of fast food, jeans, jazz, and rock and roll would simply never have defined the 20th century. Even social media, the force that now connects billions, was an American idea. Without it, the digital revolution might have taken decades longer. But the biggest change of all would have been political. Without the US, democracy might not have survived the 20th century. After World War II, the US became the ultimate defender of democratic systems around the world, funding allies, defending free elections, and countering authoritarian regimes. Without that influence, many nations might have fallen to dictatorships backed by stronger empires. Of course, not everything would have been worse. Some might argue the planet would have been less militarized. There would have been no Vietnam War, no Afghan War, no Iraq War, and no massive US military bases across the globe. And yet, the greatest loss wouldn't have been economic or political. It would have been the loss of ideas and beliefs. Because no matter if you love it or hate it, America didn't just change the world, it created the world we live in today. Without it, the story of modern civilization would have been completely different and maybe a lot less free. So without the United States of America, the world may have been a calmer planet, but also a colder one.